Hi, so a bit of a late one, bit of breaking news. I haven't done a breaking news one for a while. Ian Hazacostas is going on Reddit tomorrow to do an AMA, and Ask Me Anything. So what I thought I would do in this video is to go through some of the things that you might like to ask if you can't think of anything else. So, interestingly, when I first saw this, a few people were sort of saying, oh, you know, how is this really going to be different to a live Q&A? They'll just select the questions, answer the questions they want to answer. But there's a couple of reasons why maybe not. I mean, first of all, they've just done one of the live Q&As. So what's the reason for this? The other one is an interesting post by one of the community managers, Ithesons, who is, for those who don't know, one of those rare community managers who's actually sensible enough to play a paladin. And he said this: essentially, we'd prefer if an AMA live... Okay, I can't be held responsible for his English. Live organically. We're guests on this platform and in this community. You run it. You decide what content you upvote or downvote. We think a force sticky doesn't abide by how Reddit itself functions, and we shouldn't be an exception to that. Also, most typical users and guests browse over the sticky post, even though it's at the top. Sorry, admins, blah, blah, blah. I promise to read them, though. Basically, what they're saying is they're not going to allow us to put our questions in now. You know, this is going to be when it's on their live, which basically is Friday the 14th at 2 p.m. PDT. American time. So turn that into whatever is your local time. That's where they're going to be doing it. So in Europe, we're in the evening. So I'll probably be in Mythic Plus Dungeons. But never mind. Be interesting later on to go over that if I can't make it myself. So what are some of the things that might need to be asked? Well, of course, on the subject of Azerite traits, in the Azeroth review in particular and on comments on videos, a few people have been sort of saying that there could definitely be questions around that. Now, let's think about where Azerite gear was at the point at which the game launched. So there are a couple of things that have ultimately changed. One is that it wasn't going to be possible to trade Azerite gear. Now it is. Second, we were going to be getting up to 3 items from our Mythic cache. Tongue in cheek. But of course, we knew we weren't getting 3 pieces. We knew that a lot of times we weren't even going to get 2 pieces. But the fact that we could get up to 3, a lot of people took that to mean that there was going to be a very high chance of getting a piece of Azerite gear from the Mythic Plus cache. Because remember, when you're doing Mythic Plus dungeons, the cache is the only place where you can get Azerite gear. You can't get it from the Mythic Plus dungeons itself. Now, I have to say, personally, that I think some people are expecting too much. It's like they're expecting a piece every week. I don't think we should be expecting a piece of Azerite gear every week. You wouldn't get it every week in a raid. Why should we get it from our Mythic cache in a dungeon? And although, yes, you want to target certain ones, there's limited numbers available even from all the dungeons, all 10 dungeons. So, you know, let's be sensible about this. However, given that it is the only place we can get them, and given that we can only get 1 piece from that Mythic cache a week, and it could be, you know, that item could be anything on the loot table, I think what might need to be asked is there at least a much higher chance of getting a piece of Azerite gear from a Mythic Plus cache? You know, is it out of proportion, much higher than you would expect, given the other things that are on the loot table? If that's the case, then we might say, you know, I would potentially ask, so, you know, every how many weeks would you expect to get a piece of Azerite gear from the cache? In other words, when can we consider ourselves unlucky? I think I would maybe ask along those lines. I'm quite sure people are going to ask, can you just make Azerite gear drop in the dungeons normally? I think my objection to that would be it forces people to try and target certain dungeons, and let's say it's a dungeon which for whatever reason is not very friendly towards the class you play. If your best piece of Azerite gear drops in such a dungeon, you're struggling, aren't you? You're going to struggle to find enough groups to be able to farm it effectively. It just seems a little bit unfair. I know it won't affect everyone, and some people play in the classes that are going to be great for all dungeons, or at least great for the dungeons where it drops, and maybe the dungeon where your Bis Azerite gear drops is your favourite dungeon as well. You'd love to try and target it if at all possible. You know, so people will have different views on that. But in terms of Azerite gear, I think that would definitely be something to ask. Other things to ask, of course, I think it's fair to ask about the level of bugs. I think it's probably also fair, in particular for those of a raiding mindset, to ask about the readiness of Uldir, because when it comes to the World First Race, of course, only so many people participate in the World First Race. So when there's a bit of an issue with a boss not behaving as it should, as indeed there was, okay, it affects a relatively small number of people. But in actual fact, there's a hell of a lot of people watch the race. And, you know, even as spectators, they don't like to see that either. So I think it's fair to ask potentially a question in terms of the fact that it's not even a case of do you believe that this game was ready to go live, that the expansion was actually ready. The answer is, although, of course, I'm sure the response would come, there are always going to be bugs. Yeah, okay. But when it comes to something, there are certain things where it's very important you don't have bugs. And I think certainly ones that are as bad as that, when it comes to the raid coming out, particularly the mythic version of the raid, I think that is one of them where we have a reasonable expectation to say it should have been ready. And for what reason it wasn't. I think it's also potentially reasonable to ask why it was that at the start of the alpha process, they actually believed that classes didn't need a lot of design work. And so when they actually had to then admit it did, and now we don't have all classes really ready, what they intend to do about it and when. I think it's reasonable to say, when are you going to fix some of these classes? I know a lot of people always complain. You know, a lot of people will always think their class is constantly in need of fixing. But there are some actual issues around certain classes and specs. So, I think that could be potentially fruitful if they're genuinely going to ask questions about things like that. Because there's no point in asking them silly questions. Obviously, a lot of the people will say, well, a lot of these questions are quite negative, they're quite critical. Well, of course, what's the point of asking them a question, oh, how do you think it's gone, Ian? Or, are you pleased with the number of people that are playing it? Or, are you happy with the cinematics and blah, blah, blah. We're not going to ask those sort of questions. That's just silly. Because apart from anything else, he's hardly like to say, no, it's an absolute load of rubbish, I wish I'd never done it. Regardless of what he actually thinks about the launch, he's going to say, yeah, there's always going to be some problems. But of course, I was very happy with the launch by and large. That's, so don't ask those stupid questions. What other questions could there reasonably be? I suppose about islands and wharf fronts. They've, in terms of, it's not that they haven't really worked, it's just that they're a little bit dull. And I talked about this a long time ago because, I found them a nice little novelty first time or two. And then after that, it's like, I don't really want to do this. What is their long-term plan for it? That might be a reasonable thing. Actually, ask this. If you're going to ask about anything, ask, why has Uther's tomb had a makeover? What's that about? What are you building in the Plaguelands? Ask that. That would be a nice question. Yeah, ask that. Because that's not a critical question, but it's interesting. Oh, yes. Anything to do with paladins is, of course, interesting. Massively interesting. So anyway, those are some of the questions I would ask in there. If anyone's got any really good ones, then put them in the comments below. And, of course, if you can't think of a question yourself, but you're going to be able to make it, maybe read the comments below. Maybe a question will come up that you think, yeah, I'll ask that on all our behalf. So thanks very much if you get to do that. As I say, I'm not sure whether I will or not. It all depends on whether I'm going to be in the Mythic Plus dungeons, because that's when our normal group is probably going to try and do those. But if you do get to go on it, ask something good. Get some questions. Don't ask it in such a way that basically then you're just going to make them be defensive. Try and ask it in a constructive way. I think that's the advice I would give there, because there's, there's certain ways of asking a question, and not going to get answered because you're just trolling, basically. So yeah, and I'll catch up at the weekend with what they said on the matter. So thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with other people, especially people who might attend that AMA. And until next time, I'll see you later.